fix, but all right, are we good? You want to check the audio? 1, 2, 3. Oh, there's an echo.
Yeah, because it's my.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Good.
Now we can start.
All right, now we can start. All right, so let me make the font bigger. Okay, so Qwik is a full-on framework that comes with everything, meaning it's obviously rendering, but it's also server-side pre-rendering, SSR, SEO, hydration, serialization, bundler, everything you need to kind of build a web application is included in Qwik and Qwik City. And this is not a coincidence. It turns out in order for Qwik to do much of its magic, it requires that it is in control of all of these parts. So let's build something very, very simple. So let's, the way Qwik works is that there is a router. So if you go to, when you set up a new project, it creates a new folder. So, okay, let me back up a second. The way you get started is you do npm create Qwik at latest, okay? So I've already kind of done this part, and so you get a router, and inside of the router, you can create a new folder. Let's create a Poland/index.tsx. And in here, we can create a component, default, there we go. And server's running. So if I go to 5173/Poland, it says hello Qwik. Oops, let's make it bigger. It says hello Qwik. And let's see. So that in itself is not really that interesting. Now, if you notice, we also have a sign-in button on the top. That's because there's a top layer layout that already includes the sign-in. I'm just going to take it out just to kind of not confuse us. Okay, so now we have just our hello world, and let's take out the header as well. Oops. I see. Okay, there we go. So here's our hello world. So far, nothing really that interesting, right? So let me show you how Qwik is different. Like if you use React, you're going to feel right at home. But there are a couple of things about Qwik that is extremely different. So the first thing you're going to notice is, let's go to the network tab. And the thing to show you is that there is, let's go to JavaScript. And so these are 2 files of JavaScript, but this is from Vite. Vite is our kind of in dev mode. It's kind of the server that manages it and does hot module overloading. I'm going to filter it out. I'm going to say, actually, pretend Vite is not here because in production, it's not available. And so what you're going to notice is that there is no JavaScript. And like that's not that surprising. I'm sure your framework can also do this. But the then question becomes, what happens when you add behavior? So let's add some behavior. So let's have a count, use signal, and let's say we have 1, 2, 3. And in here, let's create a button. Wow, what is this? Plus plus on click. And we have to print out. What is this dollars coming from? Okay, so now we have a current count of 1, 2, 3, and notice still no JavaScript. And so the interesting part is now if I go and interact it, when I click on it, it is only then when the JavaScript shows up, and the count increments. So this is kind of what the magical thing about Qwik is that instead of starting your page with all of the JavaScript all on the page, it comes with very little JavaScript, and as you are using the application, more JavaScript shows up. I think there is a good example of that on our homepage. So there is a one website here, I think it's this one. And what's interesting about this website is if you look at the network tab of this website, so here's JavaScript. As you start scrolling, you see more and more JavaScript shows up, right? Because the different parts of the JavaScript basically do different parts of the animations on a page. And this is not how normal frameworks work, right? Normal frameworks, you start with all of the JavaScript at once, and then everything is afterwards you don't have to download any JavaScript, but the problem is that the startup performance is very slow because you have to download huge amounts of it. Okay, so we did this. So the question then becomes, well, how does this work? So if this would be a regular framework, the way this would have to work is that you would start at the root component and you would do hydration. And so you would visit every single component. As you're visiting all the components, you would come to listeners and you would be like, hey, I need to register a listener. And so you would have to kind of eagerly execute the application code. So in Qwik, things are kind of the other way around, where you have a button here. And this button contains information that tells it like, where do I go and download the information, right? So this is currently running in dev mode. That's why it's friendly names. But what it basically says is that if you click this button, you need to go download this URL. And inside of this URL, you're going to find this exported symbol. And the 0 over here means that you're going to have to restore this particular state. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if I go to the network tab and I hit click, notice that the only thing that downloaded is really just the count value plus plus, right? If you look at this whole file, out of this whole file, only this bit right here got extracted. Now, let's do something simple first. Let's just do console. Oops, console.log. Okay, so now when I click here, just this thing downloads and it literally just says console.log and nothing else, right? And so this is kind of interesting because this function, if you think about it, is buried, right? So what the framework did is it took this function and said export something like this, export const, sorry, right? And this is how the framework can go and then lazy load just particularly this bit and execute it. Now what's tricky is that at some point you say something like count.value plus plus. Now what makes this difficult is you can't just take this, right? If I move this code over here, that doesn't work because the system's going to be like, well, what's count? And so to make it work, we have to basically do a little bit of magic. And so the magic is something like this. So it says const count equals, and then it does something to restore the value of the count. So let's have a look. So when you click on this, the thing that it downloads is basically this is the piece of code that restores the count, and then this just goes in increments. Now the next thing to kind of notice is, well, we had to download the framework itself, and this is in dev mode, and so it's big. But if you do minified, it's like 20 kilobytes. So don't get scared by this 2.4 megabyte number here. And then we just do which status where we are, server, browser, or development mode. And so what's interesting here is that we can go and increment the count, but notice that the only thing that really downloaded was just the count value plus plus. We didn't even download the component. Like, how did the system even know what to update, right? Because you would expect that this component would download and update itself, and yet this component never did. And the reason for that is we kind of need to dwell into like how things work. So the way things work is that there is this piece of thing called a Qwik loader. And notice that the Qwik loader only exists if you have interactivity. If I remove interactivity from the page, then the Qwik loader disappears. There's no Qwik loader, right? So the Qwik loader only, or rather the code that knows how to do behavior, is only present if the particular page has some interactivity on it. The next thing it does is it says, okay, you're gonna have to listen to click events, right? So if I change this from click to, what is it, mouse, move, then now it says, oh, you need to look and you do mouse move, right? And then the counting works differently. And so this tells the system what to listen on. And then the next piece is this JSON that basically says what the state of the system is. And in this state serializes everything, and you can see that inside of the state, where is this? Click on JSON. Inside of the state, we have 1, 2, 3, right? That's the initial state of the system. Now, there's a bunch of other interesting bits. And one interesting bit is that there's this idea of a subscription. And this subscription says you need to go find an element with an ID 7, and that would be right here. So you see how this one is marked as 7? And so in this particular case, this says that if you go and increment the count, you need to update this element. And so you don't even need the component. The component could be like super complicated, right? You can say console log, let's say you say render. The render shows up on a server, an initial render, but it will never show up in the client. So if I go and interact with it, wait, what? Why is it showing up on a client? What just happened? Sorry, I'm confused. Because what did I do? What? Okay, I'm now confused because all of a sudden it's downloading something that I wouldn't expect it to download. Hold on, what is just happening? Okay, so in this case it downloads just the button and the framework, but if I add a, oh, because it has value, that's what the problem is. Okay, here we go. So now notice that it's updating the value, but it's not calling the re-render, right? Because the render is not tied to the signal, right? It's only when I tie it to the signal, only then the system says, right, okay, now I need to download the piece of code, right? So now more code shows up. Now you have code that shows up for basically the console.log, basically the component itself. And so this is kind of the superpower of Qwik, is that you write your code in a normal way, the way you would always expect it to write it, and Qwik can do all this magic of breaking the application into pieces. And as a result, it doesn't overwhelm the browser with all the JavaScript that eagerly has to run. And a way to think about it is the way virtual machines work, right? Virtual machines, when you have a, let's say I have my Mac, I boot up Linux inside of a host machine, and inside of Linux, I can watch the BIOS and then the boot up, the kernel coming up, and then I log in and I open up a word processor and start typing a letter. And at some point I can save the virtual machine and I can send it to my friend or 10 friends or 100 friends, doesn't matter, right? They can all open the file up and they are exactly on the cursor blinking, ready to enter the next character, right? What they did is they skipped the boot up process, right? They're no longer watching the BIOS go by or the kernel booting up or login screen or anything like that. They're literally where you left off. And so this is basically what we do here. We serialize, inside of the JSON, we serialize the state of the application. And then with these special comments, we serialize the boundaries of the components. And with the on mouse, on click, and so on, we serialize the event listeners. And as a result, the whole system is fully ready to go without any JavaScript, right? So there's no JavaScript present, and when you start interacting, the JavaScript shows up on the last moment. Now, at this point, you might ask, well, does it mean that it's going to be slow on a slow network? Well, this is dev mode, and in the dev mode, what we're doing is we are showing you just how fine-grained the system can be. But in production, we can create bundles that contain many of the related symbols together, and there is a service worker that starts prefetching. So if I go to our home page, let's open this up. Let's go to the network tab, and let's look at JavaScript. So if I interact with the page, oh wait, why didn't it show up? Oh, that work? No. JavaScript, why? Okay, now it's showing. So now if I interact with the page, let's refresh again. Interact. You know, when the code shows up, notice all of the size says service worker. Basically, this is coming from the service worker, not from the network. So we eagerly download the code for your application, but we don't execute the code eagerly. So we don't load it into the virtual machine of the JavaScript eagerly. Instead, the execution of the code is delayed as much as possible. Okay, so let's do a couple of more interesting bits. My favorite example is one of clock. So let's create a new component called clock. Okay, so in a clock component, let's just say we have time.value, time. Okay, so here is an example. It just says loading, right? Because it runs on a server and there's nothing that happens eagerly on the client. And so we would like to kind of make the clock run eagerly on the client. So we need to wake it up. And so for that, we have use visible task. And it looks something like this. So in here, we have to do set interval. Okay. Okay, update. Okay, so this piece of code basically says eagerly, you know, set up a timer every 1 second and update the time. So now if you go, you can see that the clock is actually updating. Now, and if you refresh the page, obviously when you come in here, there's no choice, but we have to eagerly download the code and making it run. Now, what is interesting though, is the kind of tricks we can do with it. So let's insert a div, and let's say this one has a style and height. And let's give it 500 pixels. And so now, wait, height, I misspelled it. Okay, so now the clock is below the fold. You can't see it, right? So it's down here. But notice an interesting thing that happens. There's no JavaScript, and when I scroll the clock into the view, that is the moment when JavaScript shows up, right? Because again, the system is just designed around this idea of lazy execution. And in this particular case, we're saying we need to execute some code eagerly, and a default behavior for this task is to execute when it becomes visible. So if it's not visible, why bother executing it? And it kind of makes sense, because if you need to run code eagerly, you usually need to do it because either you want to resize something, which means you have to wait until it's visible, or you want to set up like some eager connection to a database, like a streaming connection. And again, like you probably don't need to set up the streaming connection unless the component is visible to actually show the data, right? It's doing it eagerly is hard.
Would it be smart enough, for example, if in that clock I would modify some state and some other component that is already rendered, use that state, whether it will find it out and figure it out?
Yes, so let's do that. So let's pass in the count.value, right? And so here we're going to say that the clock has count. Okay. In this particular case, you actually want the signal, not the value, because you want to be able to mutate it, right? So count so count would be a signal of number. Import. And so in here, if I do count plus, count.value plus. So notice the 123 doesn't update, but when I scroll it to the bottom, the clock wakes up, and now the count updates itself, right? And if you notice what downloaded is kind of interesting. What you see is that we downloaded just the use visible task, right? So we extracted just this function right here, nothing else. That's the framework and that's the build information, right? And so even the components didn't show up on the client. And that's kind of super cool if you think about it, right? Because the components really only show up when there's a structural change to the DOM. If there is just an update, components don't show up. So let's do something more interesting. So let's see. If you do it where it's visible, oh, that's still not visible. Okay, let's just change this to on click. Okay, so let's do something more useful. What is this complaining about? Oh, signal is only a type. Okay. So I kind of showed you what Qwik is in terms of what makes it unique, but it's more than, Qwik is more just than the rendering pipeline. You want to be able to load data on a server. You want to be able to do routing, middleware, and all these pieces, right? So Qwik City kind of is the complement to Qwik, and Qwik City has everything you need to build the modern system, including middleware, data loaders, actions, etc. So let's kind of explore this for a second. So I kind of already showed you how we can create a new URL. So in this particular case, we are on the URL called Poland, and the reason for that is because I'm in the routes, Poland, index TSX. Hey Darius, there's a bit of a feedback. Did you hear it? I hear it. It just got worse all of a sudden. Okay, it's good now. So let's make a new file. And so let's say we do user/index.tsx. And again, in here, let's just do Q component. Okay, so now we can go to Poland / let's say Hevery / and what did I mess up? Oh, sorry, this is supposed to be inside of Poland. Wrong folder. Here we go. So let's load some data from the server. So the way you do this is from something called route loaders. So you can say export const use.
Does it use the Next.js convention for nesting the routes? Next.js convention or?
So which one is that? So there's many conventions.
Yeah. Okay, so you use the user and you put it in the
yes bracket. Yep. So now you can extract the user. Yes.
Okay.
So let's say use. That's the users. Let's say that component route loader. So here you can say console.log. And so here we can say get a params. So now if this gets rendered, it says you can see loading user Hevery, right? So the Hevery got extracted. And so here you would return something. I don't know. This is where you would do your there should be async function, talk to your database, do a fetch, right? db call / fetch, etc. Right? You do basically some magic here to fetch your data. And notice this console log is basically telling you that it's executing on a server, right? And so we can return something. So let's return name. Let's say I'm just going to cheat here. And projects, let's say I'll say Angular. Qwik Bazel, what? Okay, so let's just basically create this particular object. Now what's interesting is that you can use this object, right? So you can say const user equals use users. Actually, let's make it singular. Oops. And so in here, let's do a little bit div, and let's say here. User project map, user value, projects map, project, yes. Why are you red? Oh, because of the extra stuff here. Okay, so so now we basically print out. Well, that's huge. Let's do this H2. So now we basically print out my name and a list of things in here. Now, what's interesting about this is that if you go in the state, let's see, Qwik JSON, notice that this is empty. It didn't serialize any state because the system kind of looked at this page and said, oh, there is no interactivity, therefore you can't change anything, therefore I don't need to serialize anything. And not only do I need to serialize anything, I don't need to even send you any JavaScript whatsoever, right? But notice like this decision of whether or not a JavaScript should be sent or what should be sent is not something that the developer has to do or think about, right? It's just a natural outcome of using the system. So a common thing people might do is they say, well, let's create a filter. So filter might look like this, use signal, and then let's have an input here, bind value filter. Okay, so now I can go and type things in here, but of course nothing happens. So let's make something interesting happen. So the simplest way to do is to say projects.filter p is p.index of filter.value. I think it's -1. Is that how this works? What did I mess up now? Too many parentheses. So now, as you can see, it is interactive, right? I can go and as I type, it updates the list. But notice what happened automatically is when a script serialized, it automatically serialized a lot more information because now, because the page is interactive, the state has to be serialized. Specifically, Angular, Qwik, and Mantoses had to be serialized inside of the state of the system. And of course, we have to have the Qwik loader present. But notice that, like, as a developer, I didn't have to really do anything different. Notice, if I comment out the filter, the state of the serialized state is small, right? It's the act of actually using the data in a way that is interactive that causes the system to say, like, oh, okay, now I need this stuff. And so the one way to think about it is it's like tree shaking for your data, right? If you use Next.js, then Next.js, when you fetch data through, this will be equivalent to server props, right? If you fetch data through server props, that data will be inside of your next_data variable, and whether or not it's interactive or not, it doesn't matter. It's going to be there, right? And so here, the advantage is that this is very intelligent about, like, well, do I need it or not? It really depends on whether or not I have interactivity. And a way to think about it is that nothing can really happen without interactivity, right? If there is no event somewhere, then nothing can happen. And the reason why this is interactive is because when you zoom on this, you can look at the input, you see that there is an on input, there is an on property somewhere, right? And this is the property that is kind of the entry point into the system. The system doesn't enter at the root component and then recurse through the tree. Instead, the system enters through the listener, and then through the listener it says, okay, so this listener requires value 0, right? And so the value 0 is probably this empty string that's somewhere in here. I don't even know where it is. It's going to be in here somewhere. This value 0 is probably some empty string. And then the system says, like, okay, but this data is then, through signals, it knows that that empty string is then tied, this signal right here, right? Not empty string. This signal filter is tied to this signal. And because they're tied together, it now knows it also needs to serialize that signal. And so you start with the roots, which are the events, and then you recursively say, well, what's reachable, and you only send the data that is reachable to the client, which is kind of cool. So this basically shows you how to fetch data. The other thing kind of to point out is that when you're using something like server props, the issue with server props is that the only reason why server props works, the only reason why you can mix server code and client code in the same file is because nobody refers to server props, right? And because nobody refers to server props, in the client mode, it gets tree shaken away because there's no reference to it. But on the server, it gets retained because you just set the bundler into a different mode and you say, don't throw away the server props, so keep them around. But because nobody's referring to it, you cannot get data, or you cannot get type information from the server props to where you want to use it. You have to do like a type off, or you have to like do some kind of a cast somewhere in order to get the type information to flow through it. Because the moment you refer to that, use server props, things blow up. But here, we're actually directly referring to it, right? So our user here is directly referring to this. And so if I hover over this, I can see what the shape of the object is, right? It has name and project. I didn't have to do anything special, so the type information just naturally flows through the system. And the reason why it can flow through the system is because, it goes from here to the user, which goes through here, which then sees the return value, and voila, it knows what it is, right? But you can't do that in systems that rely on tree shaking, because they rely on it. Now, the reason why this works is because we have this magical $ property. And what the $ function does is it tells both the developer as well as the engine to Qwik that special magic is going to happen here. And so what the component $ basically does is it says, hey, this user, this may be inside of a client code, right? We might have to download this client code. But we cannot refer to the user, but that's fine because there's a $, and so instead there becomes a load. So let me show you. It's easier to kind of show. So if I go to Network tab, let's see, where is our component? Here's our component, and notice this component refers to user, which is imported from the original file, which is index.tsx. Where is it? User index. Is that it? No, here it is. Notice what's left behind. We left behind the fact that there was a use user constant and there was a route loader, but its content is elided, it's deleted, it's not there. And this is what makes it safe for us to refer to it. Where did the content go? Well, it went to some other location, somewhere else. In this particular case, it never gets downloaded to the client, so we don't know where it is. But through basically this trick, you can refer to things without actually having reference to it, and makes the type information flow properly. Okay, so we loaded data on a server. We probably want to update some data on the server. So what that is done through something called a use favorite use set is. Let's say I wanted to set a favorite. It wouldn't be route loader. It would be route action and okay, so let's just print this setting favorite. Okay, so how do you call this thing? So first we get a hold of it. Set is favorite action. And then we create a, so here's our li. We have to have a button. And then this form needs to be imported. Action set is favorite action. So here we're going to get params. let's just print them. Okay, so now we have a button over here, and we can click on this button, but notice this button is inside of a form, so we're just doing basically standard form post. Except because it's Qwik, we intercept the post and we do it all on a client side, so we don't do a full refresh. But by clicking this button, what we have done in the terminal is we're setting a particular favorite. Now in this particular case, there's nothing to set, so let's create an input, type hidden is favorite, and let's say we'll just set it to true. Now if I click on it, it says setting the favorite is true, right? So now we need some logic to go and update our list. So let's pretend this is a database. Just gonna cheat here. And then maybe the project would be name. False. Okay, so again, notice like everything extracted correctly, but now because we're flowing the information, because we're flowing the type information, it is now telling us like, hey, you don't have a P anymore, so you're gonna have to do name here, right? And it's not project, it's project.name, and then we have to say project is favorite. Okay, so if it's favorite, then we wanted to make it not favorite, and then we wanted to, I think this is kind of the reverse, right? So we basically want to post the item. And so maybe instead of this, we say edit, insert emoji, star. So there should be a full star. Let me see. And okay, so now we have a button. Right, and it shows us an empty star. Actually, let's put the button on the front. So now what I would like to do is clicking this button, we would like to change the output, right? So we need to pass in not just the input type, but also which project it is. Project, right? So now if I click on it, the function will know that I am changing the Angular and so on. So let's implement that on a server. So this is running on a server, right? Whereas this was running on a client. So one thing we could do is we can use Zod. This is also kind of a cool thing. And notice again the $, and so that will make sure that it won't go to the client. C dot and so on. So we say name is z.string. Oh, I have to import it. Why is this? Why are you not happy? Did I not import something from a correct place? Oh, sorry, you have to call it Boolean. Okay, so now if I click on it, this will get validated. So if I look at the params now, notice the type information for the params. It actually knows that the name is a string and his favorite is a Boolean. So we correctly coursed everything into the right information. And of course, because this is all on a server, we don't have to worry about bringing the Zod into the client because it's a pretty big library. So let's do that. So let's see. db dot projects for each if p dot name is equal to params dot name and p dot. Okay, then we set the favorite, right? So now it should work. Why is it not working? Let's see. Oh, it's invalid. Oh, right. Because we need to put the data we're sending across is just a Boolean without, it's an empty Boolean, empty string. And so you have to say that this needs to be coursed. So I think it's that course. No, is it here? Course. Okay. There we go. So notice now the button is actually updating. So what's happening here? Well, before I even show you what's happening, let me show you something even cooler. We can disable JavaScript, so no JavaScript is running now, and the buttons still work. So even with JavaScript disabled, this is fully working form. And it's kind of cool, right? Because not that we would like to disable JavaScript, but it's kind of nice to know that we can kind of do these kinds of tricks. And it basically shows the importance of SEO. So let me enable JavaScript again. What did I do? Okay, so what is exactly happening? So the way this system works is that at the beginning, when we navigate to a page, we always execute a route loader. That fetches our data. Now that we have the data, we go and render the particular component. And the reason why this is done this way is because we want to kick off fetching of this data as soon as HTTP request comes in. We don't want to start rendering and then later realize we need some data, right? So you want to kick off the data fetching immediately. So all of the route loader methods get eagerly executed up front. They start fetching the data and submit it as a DB, and then in the client you can use the data from the server. Then we create a form, and notice this is a capital F form. And so the way this form works is that if we are in JavaScript world, then we intercept the form so you don't do a full post, but if JavaScript is not present, you're just doing a regular post. And so when you submit this form, you submit it as a post rather than a get, and that makes the route action execute. And so the route action goes and modifies the data, and then because all of these things are signals, we rerun all the route loaders to send updated data to the client. And so the end result is that you have a normal behavior, right? And so whether or not you have this JavaScript present really depends on whether or not the JavaScript's enabled inside of the UI. But you also know that all of this stuff will render just fine for crawlers, right? For SEO. So we talked about that. I'm going to pause here. Do you have questions? Okay, this is all obvious, or like, this is cool, right?
It's really cool.
It's very cool. I think so too. Okay, so let me show you something else that I think is super, super cool. Let's see. So we're working on a user. Actually, let's just create a new route because this is kind of getting busy. So new file awesome/index.tsx. Okay, let's again start with a component. Okay. So let's talk about unified execution model, and that is where do things run, right? So let's create a button here. Okay, so no listener, right? Let's see. We have to go to awesome, Poland awesome. Okay, so we have a button here. and nothing works. Oh, by the way, this thing that shows up in the corner over here is kind of cool. If you hit Alt, then everything becomes kind of a different color. And if I click on it, it will take me directly to the line of source in my IDE where something needs to be edited. So let me show it to you on, if I, for example, go to the home page where there's more parts to it, you know, I can click on it and different parts become highlighted, and I can go click on it and it takes me directly to the piece of text that generated that content, which is kind of cool. Okay, let's get back to here. So here's a click me. So let's give it a listener. And I'm going to say async, and I'm just going to make it here so we can type more. Oops. Console.log. Okay, so where is this going to print out? So actually, let's go here. Console.log, awesome rendered. And let's, okay, so we see that it's rendered on the server, right? Then we can go here, and if you click on it, you can see that it's updated here. So let's do something else. So use task. Let's do some work. Console.log. Sure, awesome task. You need to import it. So the task also gets executed on the client. So let's create a count again. Count equals use signal 1, 2, 3, and let's just render the count. Okay, and let's print it out in here. Count.value. So we print initial count on a server, right? If I click on it, I can increment it. Why is it not incrementing? Because, oh yeah, I forgot to say console count, oops, count value plus plus. Okay, so I can increment it, right? But the use task is not rerunning. And that's because tasks by default don't track, so you have to say track. And in here, you can then say, hey, I want to track this function like that. And so now notice something interesting happens. So the awesome task starts running on a server, but then when I click it, it runs on a client as well. So the execution lifetime of these tasks are not what you would expect, right? Because they begin their life on a server, but then they continue running on the client as needed. And if I didn't click on that button, then it wouldn't rerun this particular task. And so how do you know where things run, whether it's a server or client? And that is, you look at the name in front of the $sign, and then that basically tells you what are the rules. And the most rules are that the particular code can run either on a client or on a server, depending on the circumstances. So most of these most of the things that have a $sign are isomorphic, meaning they can run anywhere that you want, anywhere it's convenient. OnClick obviously will always run on the client, because only a client will have listeners, right? So now let's create some more crazy stuff here. Let's put this up. Let's do create a function, and this function will say console.log okay, and then we can execute the function, right? So this is kind of expected, right? So we clicked, and then we see the and let me call it different. Let's call it inner function. Okay, so when I click on it, you can see that the inner function executes. And again, this is exactly what you would expect. Nothing here is kind of surprising. But let me show you the surprising bit. I can just mark this function as being run on a server. And all of a sudden, that function is no longer here. Now it shows up here. That is crazy, right? If you fully understand what just happened. And it's not just that. This function can go and get a hold of count.value, right? So if I click here, you can see that the inner function correctly updates its count. So it's executing code on a server. And it goes even crazier. What if I return to you, and this is a bug in VS Code, it will not auto-import this. I have to do it manually. I don't know why. I have to file a bug with them. I could return a function out of the server and server function returned from server, function returned from server, whatever. And let's say we could do negative value here, and then we say name. And so it says he doesn't know what name is. Sure, name is string. And so now this function, let's see, this function returns something, right? So now we can say this function 2 is returned from here. I just have to say await. And now this function 2 can be invoked. And look at that, it knows that it has to have a string, right? So this function, if you hover over it, right, it takes a string because, well, you said it took a string. If you took a number, right, it correctly flows the type and says, well, yeah, wait, you need to give me a number as well. Let me just get rid of that. And so it is kind of cool, right? So, okay, so what happens? So you click here, and so notice the function ran on a server, returned a function, and then that function ran on a client. That's kind of mind-blowing if you think about what's just happening. And the reason why this thing works is because what Qwik fundamentally knows how to do is it knows how to serialize closures. Not just functions, right? Functions is just a piece of code. That's easy. Like serializing function is easy. It's just a URL to some JavaScript that's being exported, right? But serializing a closure is hard because it's a combination of the URL of the data plus some internal state that the function closed over. And so, using stuff like worker dollar is kind of server dollar is pretty cool. We also have, we can also say worker dollar and we will run some code in a separate worker for you. And things like that. Let's see, what else can I show you? I'm going to pause here, see if you have questions.
It's a little bit scary of mixing, isn't it a little bit scary of mixing server and front-end code? I mean, I'm sure that you can get used to it, right? But,
I think it's scary from the point of view of it is new. And therefore, you don't know what the rules are. But once you know what the rules are, you have to look at what's in front of the dollar sign, right? Because the dollar sign is always this boundary where things can happen. And then you just look what's in front of it, and that basically tells you where it runs. So you know that server dollar sign will always run on the server, and you know that route loader will always run on the server, route action will always run on the server, etc. And if you think about it, systems already do this. Like if you look at Next.js and you look at render client server props, right? That is already mixing server and client code. It's just not as drastic or seamless as it is here, right? There, it's just one function that is a well-known name that you can use. But if you think about it, you can put complex operations in here. So let's do something more kind of realistic. So where did I go here? So inside of the server here, let's read a file system, for example, right? So read, let's just cheat. Let's see, what do we want to read? Package.json, sure. Const file. So if I go in, and you know what, I can just return it, right? File to string. And so here we can just say, let's see if that's going to work. There we go. So I've just executed code on a server and the response was sent to the client. Now, if you think about it, this thing cannot be imported on a client, right? The read file sync imports from Node.js, right? So you cannot even get the code into the client. If you were to get the code into the client, it would blow up saying like, hey, I don't know how to import FS, right? So the system has to be intelligent enough to be like, yes, I see that you are, using this particular thing from the server bit, and I will remove the import so that it will never get to the client for you. The other thing you might be asking is like, well, how does this actually work? So let's look at that. So if I click, let's click this. So notice we sent there's a special URL we go to, and this special URL has a payload, and the payload basically says what the objects are. So in this particular case, the 125 is the initial signal value, right? But notice in here is also a URL to the code that runs, right? We don't send the code across, we just send like, this is where you find the code. And on the end of it is information about what state needs to be restored for this code to run, because it's a closure, and so we have to be always restoring a state, right? So if you think about it, this we call this thing QRL. There's 3 bits of information in here. There is the URL. I mean, it's clear on the button. Let's go on the button, right? There is the URL to go fetch. There is the separated by the hash symbol, followed by a symbol name to extract from it, right? Because you can have more than one piece of exported content in a function, and followed by a information about how do I restore the state. Let's go back to the previous example. Was it? Yeah. So in this example, if you look at, for example, the input has state 0. Let's look at the button. Actually, it would be under form. Notice the form has a bunch of other things here, right? It says I need 0, 1, 2, and 3. So this is how it knows what to restore, right? It knows kind of how to look at these things and wake it up. So the bigger innovation here, the thing that makes everything possible are these $signs, right? Because they are the things that know how to break up the application into pieces. And specifically, they know how to refactor the code so that the entry point becomes an event. So you enter into the system through the events, not through some kind of a main method that you have built before, right? So all existing systems, you boot them up by calling the main method, right? Which means that no matter how the user interacts, it's always the same code that runs an initial render, right? There's always the same entry point into the system. Whereas with Qwik, it's all kind of reversed in the sense that the entry points are the event system. So when the event comes in, it is then when you decide. And so in this particular case, there is an event handler on this button, there's an event handlers on here, and so on. And so the more event handlers you have, the more ways that the system can be entered. And this is important because it says like if you're entering the system in this way, then you are not. I don't need this other code, right? And so the great innovation is really this $sign, and this $sign is both information to you as a developer that special magic is happening here, but also information to the optimizer so that the code can be refactored in this particular way so you can do this magic. All right, let me pause here, see if you have more questions.
Still, it's not, for me, for example, it's not that 100% clear that, for example, you can start your journey on the client into the server and end your journey on the client, right? You theoretically can do it, right?
Yes.
The possibilities are great, but I think there needs to be some time for it to sink in, right?
Yeah, so this is also a place where things like linters can come in, and they will tell you things that you may be doing something that is not okay. Actually, let's kind of talk about that for a second. Let's go back to a simple, okay, so here's our simple counter, right? So let's say we have a function here that just does something very simple. Actually, let's just return 1, 2, 3. Doesn't matter, right? So now, if you, let's say you wanted to plus equals, let's say you wanted to call this function. Notice what happens. The launcher is screaming at you that, like, hey, what you're doing is okay JavaScript. Like, yes, it's valid, but within the rules of Qwik, it isn't, because you are referring to a function that is declared at line 10. And you know, I will not have a way of referring to, I will not have a way of serializing it, right? And it's telling you what to do. It says, like, what you need to do is you need to take this function and wrap it in a $, right? So it basically says, do this. There needs to be await. And now everything is fine. Oops, no, I have to import the $. So there are basically extra rules that you have to learn. Just like you know special rules about use methods, right? Use methods have special rules, what you can and cannot do. The $ things also have special rules that you have to learn. And once you understand these rules, they are very simple because they're kind of intuitive in the sense that, like, oh, yeah, of course, what's happening here is I'm serializing all the inputs to the function, right? Not just the explicit input that goes through here, but also the things I've closed over. And so these things that I'm about to serialize, they better be serializable, right? And so that's what this particular thing was screaming at, saying, like, hey, the thing you're about to do isn't going to work. Okay, what else can I show you? I can talk for hours, but I don't want to bore you for hours. Which part? So we kind of, okay, let's kind of go back. I showed you how to do basic components. We have integrations. Well, actually, let's go through. Oh, we can talk about React. We should talk about that. Okay, so let's go through integrations. So we have integration with Auth.js, so authentication, Builder.io for CMS, Cypress for testing, icons, image optimization, internationalization, forms, monorepos, Partytown, PostCSS, Tailwind, styled vanilla extract, which are all different ways of doing CSSs. And also, by the way, all of this will be with lazy loading, just like the rest of the framework. And you know, all the other ones. Anyways, the ones that's super cool actually, I think, is Qwik React. And what Qwik React basically allows you to do is it allows you to run React components inside Qwik. Now, we can't magically make them lazy loadable and all that stuff, but we can turn them into an island and lazy hydrate that particular component. So with Qwik, you can actually essentially build something like Astro kind of for free. You can lazy load React components. I can go into a deeper demo if you're interested.
Yeah.
You want to see? Okay, let's see. So I have to install. So we have a nice CLI. Here, let's do it manually. So there's a nice CLI that you can run, and of course now it's gonna, okay, make it big screen. Come on, make it big screen. How do I make it big screen? I have to, okay. So it says, do you want to run a command? Yes. I want to do an add. I want to add, oh yeah, we also have all the adapters for all the edge servers, etc. And let's add React. And we have to wait for npm to download. All right, so I think it created, yeah, routes React. Okay, so it created a route for us. /React/, okay. So if we go to React, okay, there is a slider, there is a pull down, there's a table that renders in here that you can interact with that. So these are all material components. So let me show you, let's start with a super simple one like the slider. Oh, before I do that, let's go to the network tab. and notice that no JavaScript is present. It's when I hover, oh, oops, sorry, I have to go to JavaScript. Okay, no JavaScript is present. It's when I hover over the slider where it downloads the JavaScript and it includes React. And so now dragging the slider becomes possible, right? So this React slider gets SSR'd on a server because, you know, React components can do that, right? And we send only the HTML to the client, and then we delay hydrate it only when you hover over the particular item. So let's have a look how this works. So we have our slider. This is our MUI slider, right? Where it was imported from is from a separate file. So this is important because this is a React world now. There's a separate import that has to happen for the JSX. So in our slider, we take our regular slider from Material UI, and all we do is we wrap it using this thing called Qwikify. And that gives us an equivalent Qwik component in our world. And what we also do is we give it eagerness, saying like, hey, when should I hydrate this particular thing, right? And in this particular case, we're saying like you should be hydrating it on hover. So, so this slider does it on hover. And I notice that you have all of the methods in here. So you can say, you know, you can bind to value, you can bind to onChange. And that's the reason why when I move it back and forth, this button down here updates, right? Because I am updating the count, and then there's a separate material button that is being woken up. Now what's interesting about this material button is that this material button, if you go here, notice it doesn't have any eagerness, which means that this button never hydrates on the client. And let me show you. Wait, it does it? Orient, hover. Okay, what did I do here? So if I go over, yeah, nothing happens. Like the CSS changes, but nothing is happening. Specifically, if I click on it, it says click, but notice there's no ripple, right? I can hydrate it. I think it's hydrate. Eager, no, what is it? There is something that I can't remember right now. Okay, we can just do it here. So now if I hydrate it on hover, then if I click on it, notice there was a nice ripple this time, right? So it's kind of an interesting that for the case of a button, we don't eagerly wake it up. We don't wake it up at all. And because we don't wake it up, obviously it doesn't work, but we can still listen to the click events. So we basically have a material button without actually paying any cost for it, right? The client side is completely not downloaded. And of course, you can see that we have variants. So if we go and change it, the change of the input forces us to the client side render of this button, right? Because there's no other way for us to change it, right? So the hydration is either eager because we told it like to unhover or click or some other thing, or the hydration happens because one of the inputs has changed, like in the case of a button. And in this particular case, we are listening not on the button itself, we are listening on the host, which basically says like, let Qwik do the listening rather than the Material UI do the listening. And then of course, the table on the bottom is all client-side rendered that you can see over here. And so you can see that you can have super complicated things. I believe also this table does not have a server-side rendering, right? So this is a limitation of Material UI table component, not of Qwik, because Qwik can server-side render these components because they actually work on a React can server-side render them, but this table is not server-side renderable, so it's not possible for us to do it either. So the reason why this is important is because, let's say you have an existing React application and you want to slowly migrate it over, you can do so by doing it piecemeal, parts by parts.
Can you do the same for Angular applications?
So it's not part of the core, but yes, there is a Angular Qwikify. I don't know who's working on it. It's oh, what is this? Why is this? It's not what I expected. Yes, somebody in the community is working on it, but it's not part of the core of Qwik.
Because it's harder for Angular, or?
No, it's not harder. It's Qwik is kind of focused more on React developers, so the syntax, etc. So it's a much better kind of a fit. Also, until recently, Angular didn't really have a meta framework like Next or Solid Start or SaltKit, and so it's not exactly kind of a fit. Plus, I didn't want to like be seen as the guy who was undermining Angular. So these are all the reasons why there isn't an official support, but somebody in the community has already done it. What other things would you like to see? I think we covered a lot. How long have we been talking for? Like an hour and a half?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Let's go through our docs. Let's see if I missed anything. Let's go back to, which one was it? This one. No. This list right here. So this list, the way we made it work is we just added a filter here, right? But the better way of doing it is to use something called a computed. So the way you would want to do is you want to say user filtered, and then you can say const user filtered is not use computed. And you just say return filter dot value dot filter value dot projects. Why is it not value projects? Why? Not filter, sorry, it's user. Filter. Right, so then this thing will just delete projects. There we go. So now we have a piece of code that the difference now is that this piece of code, right, is being extracted, and so we can compute the signal independently. So if nobody is, for example, listening to that particular signal, then we can delay loading it over here. So basically, the kind of the mental model that I showed you is use task to run. It's kind of like use effect, but there's enough differences that we have to have a different name for it. Use visible task and use computed are kind of the primitives with which you can build up things on the client side. And then on the server side, you would use things like route loader, route action to build up your fetching of the data and rendering of the data. And so together with all of these components, you basically get to build just about anything you would like.
Can you show us how to deploy a Qwik project to Cloudflare, for example? Or is too much?
No, it's super easy, super easy. So we do the same exact thing. Oops. Is this one already deployed? Hold on, let me see. This folder is already deployed. So the thing you would do is you would say Qwik. Oops. You would run Qwik, and you would say yes, and you would say add, and you would choose, let's say Cloudflare. and it will go and install the adapter, but I've already done this in this particular project, so that's already done. And so then all you have to do in Cloudflare is Cloudflare So this particular project is, wait, what? What happened? Where is it? Oh, here we go. So this is the Qwik Workshop. So it's already hooked up. I can create a brand new project if you'd like. I'm going to create a brand new project. Let's do that. Okay, let me create a brand new project. This one's already hooked up, so it's kind of confusing. So let's start it from the very, very beginning. I guess I should have done this first. Okay. So let's create a npm create Qwik at latest. Whoa, what just happened? Do you want to override? Oh. Okay, so we create a basic app. And let's see how fast the network is here. Okay, Qwik app. Okay, so we just created a brand new application in our dev. Running on 5173, right? So this is a brand new application. This is kind of the starter hello world that comes with the Qwik. So next step is to add Cloudflare adapter. In our Qwik add. Oh, it's not big enough. Okay. Cloudflare. So that sets up Cloudflare adapter for you. And then you need to have a repo. So let's make a repo. It says to do this bit. So let's connect the repo. No, why is it not running? Origin, oh, sorry, did I go to the wrong? Wait, what? Origin already exists. What, I already added it? Okay, it's already added. I don't know how that happened. Okay, so git push. Oh wait, no. Git status. Git check-in. Git add. Git check-in dash. Check-in dash. Okay, so basically we now push our code into GitHub repo. Then you go to Cloudflare and you push a button to say, I want to add a new one. Where is that button? Create application. Pages, connect to Git. I want to connect Hevery. Pull on meetup. Begin setup. It's a Qwik framework. Save and deploy. Okay, and now it's building. We're going to get a URL soon and it's going to be up and running. Okay. Deploy, deploy, deploy. Okay, build complete. Okay, so in about a minute, let's see how much, 40 seconds, complete, yeah. Success, okay, continue to project. And so now we get a URL, here we go, this is our URL. So now we have it's super easy, right? And so just to kind of show how easy it is, we can go source route / index and hero, is it here? Right, here, you know what? Here. It is free hosting. So here, if you go here and you want to edit something, I want to edit this, I do the alt, I want to edit the word fantastic. So, fantastic to have you in Poland, right? Save, updates here, so that's just the local host. Git status, git echo.history to .git ignore. Okay, git check-in-a-m update text, git push origin. Okay, so just by pushing to git now, so now we updated this bit, right? The GitHub updated, right? So updated the text, and now this thing should update in about a minute. So right now, if I go into it, you can see that it is running. So you can see in progress. It's rebuilding the page, and in less than a minute, it should then update our output. So it is extremely easy to get it up and running, and I believe Cloudflare gives you like 100,000 requests per day or something like that, which is basically for free unless you're doing some serious stuff. All of the stuff that we have is actually hosted with Cloudflare, and we're just using their free tier, and it's fine. Actually, the qwik.builder.io homepage is on a free tier, and it gets a lot of traffic. Actually, no, it's more than 100,000. I don't know what it is.
It is a great combination. Like Cloudflare is really quick, and Qwik is quick.
There you go. See, this is actual URL, right? This is not localhost. And it's updated.
And we can disable JavaScript and it will
Yes. And you can disable, well, actually, if you go in here, network tab, JavaScript, there is no JavaScript here. What is this? Oh, that's probably Chrome extension, so that doesn't count. And then, if I go interact with it, sure, JavaScript downloads. But you know what it is? It comes out of the service worker, right? So it was instant on. So like, think about it. You have a service worker here without you even trying to set it up, right? Like you just got a top-notch setup without even trying. And you saw that I just created an app out of nothing, right? And so the service worker goes and prefetches all the assets that you need for this app.
Scary magic is happening.
It's a good kind of magic. What else can I show you? Darius, you know most of this stuff. What I didn't cover. Let's see, I talked about React. I talked about middleware. Oh, we didn't really talk about middleware, like authentication and stuff. But, okay, let me go back to
The routing maybe, and
Qwik. Okay, so when we are inside of a particular route, let's see, we're here on a user. So this one had a route, right? So let's go back there. Was Poland / Hevery. Oh, you have to run it. Okay, so remember this page? So in here we have our route loader, right, for loading data. But if you wanted to do authentication, what we could do is we could say export const on request. It's request handler. async request. Okay, console.log. Okay, so we can request that, I don't know, let's just do URL, and we can do, no, we can print URL, and then we can do await next. Okay, so let's see. Oh, let's just do a simple one to string. So notice what happens. It prints request URL, then it goes and console logs loading user, then it renders the page, and then it says done, right? Because you're in here. And so in here, you know, this is like middleware. You can wrap calls to other things, and you could put like authentication in here, or, you know, checking the cookies, and if the cookie isn't set, then you redirect, or, you know, whatever. So, you know, all of these things are possible here. So like, oops, I think I can do params. Params. So in here, /params. So now it says that's user Hevery, right? Because this part is available as params, right? Now it's Miško. And so we can, for example, say that if params dot user is Miško, then we do throw redirect. Oops. Redirect 308. And we go to, let's say, Qwik Hevery. That sounds good. Right? So now if I go to Miško here, it automatically redirects, but only for that particular one, nothing else, right? So you could, you know, this is standard middleware stuff that you can build up over here in addition to everything else. And so you basically have like Express out of the box, but the nice thing is that this runs on Edge, right? Express will not run on Edge. You can't use Express on Edge because Express is tied to Node.js, if I remember correctly. Whereas this thing will run just fine on Edge. I can just deploy it and everything works. Let's see what did we miss. Oops. So let's go quickly over it. We talked about state, so like use state, etc. We didn't go too. I mean, we kind of showed you events as an on-click, but you can do more complicated things with events as well. Tasks, we kind of talked about tasks and how they work and how they have this life cycle that begins on a server and then magically moves to the client. Of course, you have context just like you have context in React. So for those, you have slot projections and, you know, different ways of styling. We didn't get to styling, but you can totally do styling. And it will be lazy loaded. So if you navigate to a particular page, it only loads it when it's needed. We talked about routes, route loaders, route actions, different layout. Pages is basically just the thing that renders your page. So that's the default component that you export. I showed you server $. We didn't really talk about caching or environment variables, but like those are pretty straightforward. So, you know, everything that you need is available for you to build an app, and the app out of the box will be SEO crawlable. As a matter of fact, let me just show you this on this page. Inspect here. Disable JavaScript. Okay, so JavaScript's off, and you know, this page, so for example, it goes white because the dark mode requires JavaScript. So you can navigate around, you know, everything works. You can go to the bottom, you know, the next page, because it's just a button, everything works. You can even go to the playground and you can see like, hey, most of the playground loads, except what doesn't load is the actual editor and the actual app or console, because like that requires JavaScript, right? But you can see that most of it is actually there. You can go to tutorials. All the text for tutorials are available. You can, you know, go to a lot of different places in the app and kind of navigate things through. Obviously, these parts don't work because they require JavaScript, but everything else does. And so this is what SEO sees. So out of the box, this is what you get, which is pretty darn good. You know, it's not like an afterthought. The other thing that's interesting with existing systems is that you kind of have to optimize them, right? You start building your application and it goes really nice at the beginning, and at some point you're like, oh, it's slow. I need to introduce lazy loading, or I need to introduce, you know, some kind of way of like pruning the branches so that I don't go and re-render everything all the time. And so you then start doing things to kind of improve the situation. Except like it's not that easy to figure out what to do to kind of make the situation better, and most people just give up and never do anything. Whereas in Qwik, there is really no optimization step, right? Because with signals, things only update when necessary, the code only downloads when necessary, the state serializes only when necessary. So there's actually no real APIs for optimizing anything. You know, there is no use memo or anything of that sort because, well, it's just built into the system. It's just how you design your apps out of the box. So there really isn't any kind of optimization step that happens.
Also, I think the initial complexity, right, of the, it's linear, right? Because no, it's even not linear. It's a constant, right?
Yeah, it's all of one, yes.
Yeah, because you don't need to. It doesn't depend on the size of the application. I mean.
That's right. So let me actually show you this. I think this is a kind of a cool demo. This is our homepage. And I can run this homepage. I'm going to run it performance. And this homepage is built using Qwik. Let it just profile for a second. And I'm going to open the same exact page, and I'm going to say render equals next. So this is the same exact page rendered using Next.js. Okay, here we go. Inspect. Performance, run, and while it's running, okay, I'm going to go to page speed insights, and page speed insights. Okay, so this is this one is Next.js, and so let's look at first 1 second life of the component, right? So the first, no, I misspelled it. This is not, this is Qwik. Render, okay, I misspelled it, hold on. That means I also misspelled it here. Okay, let's do this again. So this is the first second of the life of the page. Right here. And what I want to show you is just how busy the JavaScript is. And specifically, it took about 300 milliseconds for the JavaScript to execute on the Next.js. And this thick, you know, JavaScript chunk that you see here, that by the way, it went too long. See how it's complaining that it went too long? This is the standard hydration process, right? And this is a modern M1 notebook. Like imagine you're on a mobile device, this would be way, way slower. And this is now the same exact thing. Let's zoom into first 1 second of the life of the page. So that's this much. Notice only 43 milliseconds. It's a huge difference, right? But also notice like, yeah, there is stuff happening on the page, but for the most part, there are no big blocking chunks, right? If you compare this output versus this output, like this is night and day. Like there's a huge difference between it. Oh, look at that. They actually, this thing shows up. I did not know that about this. And so the result of this is that, you know, Next.js site gets 46 out of 100, whereas Qwik site gets, you know, 95, 97, somewhere over there out of 100. And it's the same exact site. And notice what you get in terms of advice. It says, oh, reduce unused JavaScript. It's like, great, thanks for the advice. What exactly am I supposed to do? Like, how am I supposed to go into, into the application and download less JavaScript, people will tell you like, well, you're supposed to lazy load. Right, but lazy loading only works for components that are not in the hydration tree, right? If a hydration runs across a component, then it has to be downloaded. And so the reduce unused JavaScript basically is telling me that all the click listeners that are all over the page, those aren't being executed yet, and yet I've downloaded the code, but there's no easy way for me to lazy load them. And so, the advice is true, but it's kind of pointless. It's like, saying, I'm poor, what should I do? You should make more money. Like, yes, I understand that, but how exactly am I supposed to do that, right? And so if you look at the equivalent here, you basically, you don't have any kind of advice here, because it's like, well, it's, the total blocking time is almost 0. All of the numbers are excellent. And it makes a difference in terms of how the page kind of comes together. Okay, let me show you one more thing, and then I'll be done. Qwik dream demo. Okay, so there's this demo we put together, and what this demo wants to show off is micro front-end services. So each one of these boxes were actually rendered on a separate URL. So that's rendered here. That's, this thing renders over here. See, there's only part of the page. This content renders over there. The children, the comments render over there. And the reason why this is important is because it's showing off that you can have multiple Qwik apps on the page. Why does this matter? Imagine this is a site that you want to personalize. You come to the first edge worker, and this edge worker talks to the other URLs which have the different parts. And the edge worker says, everybody gets the same menu system, right? And so you talk to the second edge worker and says, give me the menu. And the second edge worker goes like, well, I don't need to do anything. I'm just going to return it out of a CDN cache hit, right? I'm just going to return it to you because everybody gets the same menu. Bam, you're done with that. The next thing is, I need a shopping cart. I need a shopping cart. Shopping cart will probably have your name, and so it has to be rendered. And so that edge worker has to do the rendering, but it's a small thing, so it's not a big deal. Then I need a hero. Well, everybody gets a different hero, but there's only so many heroes I can choose from. So the only thing the edge worker has to do is to just say like, which hero image do I want, right? And then it's a cache hit. And then maybe you need to go and render the product in a separate edge worker. And then, oh, by the way, this comment section on the bottom, that only downloads when you start scrolling. So we don't even bother downloading the whole thing until it starts scrolling. And because all of these things are on a separate URL, why can't I pop it up? I can't click on it? What? They're all on a separate URL. It needs to be, okay. On a separate URL, what's interesting about Qwik applications is that they can be easily concatenated. So if you go to the actual page, what you're going to see is that this container says it's paused, it's not currently running, and there are other containers on a page. So this guy would be, where's the container? Somewhere in here. Here's the container right here, right? So these containers can just be concatenated, and these containers are completely self-describing. So just by concatenating a piece of HTML, a server-side include essentially, that becomes a fully functional application inside of it. And this is how you can kind of build up very rich, personalized content, where most of the content comes out of a CDN and few things don't. But the other nice thing about it is every team owns a separate URL, and so every team can deploy and roll back independently of everybody else, and they can even, in theory, run on a separate version of Qwik. They don't even have to be on the same version. And so they can really have a independent development story. So Qwik is actually really, really good for micro frontends.
Is there any orchestration framework needed here, or does the Qwik?
No, there's really no orchestration framework needed here, because the way the containers talk to each other is through custom events. So if I go here and I want to hit add to shopping cart, so now notice that the shopping cart, let's find the shopping cart. The shopping cart container which is this guy. Well, it has a visible, so it already woke up, but somewhere in here, it says on document session token received event and document order change event, right? So it's listening to these two events. So if you go to the network tab, when I go and click on the add cart, it is at that point, and this one doesn't have the service worker running, which is why it was a little slow. At this point that it downloads the code necessary for updating the customer, whatever that was. SVG, okay, I don't know what that was. I guess it updated. Oh yeah, I guess the SVG over here changed. But the point is that it all is done through events, right? And so because on the end of the day, you're just sending a custom event and you can listen to events without knowing, like these two containers, they don't need to know about their events ahead of time. They just need to agree on a particular event and a particular structure. And so hitting this button fires a custom event, and then that causes the wake up of the shopping cart. So it's not that shopping cart doesn't have to eagerly be woken up and listening, right? It's all done lazily. Okay.
I think we have everything we can achieve.
We covered a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Happy to answer questions.
This looks super cool.
Thank you. I think it's amazing. I think we are a little bit in a world where like everybody's claiming everything, and so it's hard to stand out. But like, I think Qwik is fundamentally different. It is not, the way Qwik solves the problems is not the way everybody else solves the problem. And because of that, it can get these properties that other frameworks cannot get. And the win for Qwik only gets better as your application gets bigger, right? Like the more complex your application become, the more these things matter, and the more of a win you will have. Which is kind of a little sad because, you know, people build like comparison applications, right? And so in the comparison application, like a movie app or something, they're like, look, we can be, you know, good score. I'm like, yeah, but it's a demo app, right? Like what I don't see is actual real world e-commerce websites with good performance. That is not something that you can actually find. Funny enough, some e-commerce websites I've seen cheat where they disable JavaScript if they are inside a Lighthouse score. So that they take Lighthouse and they're like, look, we have a good thing. But the thing to understand is that these numbers here and these core web vitals are two separate things. They have nothing to do with each other. Like for example, this says that we are passing because most people are coming to us on Qwik website. So even though I asked this thing to be for Next.js, the reason why this is passing is because it's running Qwik, right? And so this is a Lighthouse. It's basically in-lab test. This is a prediction of what the actual thing will be done. But the Core Web Vitals is actually instrumentation of Chrome. So if you use Chrome to navigate to a page, the Chrome reports back to Mothership, you know, what was the experience like for the user in an anonymous way. And so you cannot cheat that one, right? Because if you disable JavaScript, the Core Web Vitals will, you know, you won't have a site for the user. So you can cheat on Lighthouse score, but it's pointless because this is just for your entertainment. This is what really matters. And the only way to get this thing good is to actually be good. You can't really cheat over there. Thank you. Thank you for being such a good audience and listening to me talk for almost 2 hours.